4 grueling years in a federal supermax only sharpened the ruthless edge of Chicago's most feared syndicate boss. Free at last and ready to reclaim his empire, he marches into his trusted underboss's estate only to be frozen in his tracks by a father's absolute worst nightmare. There, his fiercely protected billionaire heiress daughter is on her knees, scrubbing the floor in a maid's uniform. The rain over Lake Forest, Illinois was unrelenting, coming down in sheets that turned the sprawling suburban estates into blurry gray monoliths. Inside the back of the tinted Lincoln Navigator, Nicholas Costello sat in utter silence. He was a man who had built a multi-million-dollar empire on blood extortion and absolute loyalty. For the last 4 years, however, he had been nothing more than inmate 88491-024 at ADX Florence, serving a heavily reduced sentence on a string of RICO charges, thanks to a highly irregular closed-door deal with a federal prosecutor named Thomas Higgins. Nicholas had taken the fall. It was the only way to shield the legitimate front of the Costello enterprise, and more importantly, to protect his only daughter, Mia. Before the heavy steel doors of the penitentiary had slammed shut, Nicholas had handed the keys to his kingdom to his oldest friend and most trusted underboss, Rick Dawson. Rick had sworn on his mother's grave that he would manage the family's casino revenues, keep the capos in line, and treat 18-year-old Mia like his own flesh and blood. Nicholas had even established a $50 million blind trust for Mia through the First National Bank of Chicago, accessible only to her and overseen by Rick until her 25th birthday. "We're here, boss," muttered Frankie Nicholas's driver, and one of the few men who had waited faithfully for his return. Frankie pulled the heavy SUV up the winding tree-lined driveway of the Dawson estate, a massive 30-room French provincial mansion bought with Costello money. "Keep the engine running," Nicholas rasped. His voice was gravelly, unused to idle chatter. He adjusted the lapels of his charcoal suit. He hadn't told Rick he was being released early. He wanted to surprise his old friend. He wanted to surprise his little girl. Nicholas bypassed the security intercom at the iron gates. Frankie still had the master access codes and strode directly to the heavy mahogany front doors. Finding them unlocked, he pushed them open, stepping into the cavernous marble-floored foyer. The house was eerily quiet, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock. But as Nicholas walked further into the sprawling estate, moving past the formal dining room, the sharp, unmistakable sound of shattering porcelain echoed from the kitchen corridors. Then came the screaming. "You stupid, clumsy little rat! Do you have any idea how much that vase cost? It's imported from Milan, you filthy street trash." Nicholas's brow furrowed. The voice belonged to Evelyn Dawson, Rick's socialite wife. He moved silently down the hallway, the thick Persian rugs absorbing his footsteps. As he rounded the corner into the sunroom, the scene before him made the air leave his lungs in a violently sudden rush. A young woman in a cheap, ill-fitting black and white maid's uniform was on her hands and knees. Her hands were submerged in a puddle of water and sharp ceramic shards. She was visibly trembling, her frame dangerously thin, her collarbone jutting out starkly against the harsh fabric of the dress. Her hair, once a vibrant, glossy cascade, was hacked short and tied back with a frayed piece of string. Evelyn Dawson stood over her, brandishing a riding crop, her face twisted in an ugly sneer. "Clean it up. And if you miss a single speck of dust today, I'll have Liam lock you back in the cellar without dinner. Again!" The maid scrambled to pick up the broken pieces. As she reached for a large, jagged shard, her hand slipped. The porcelain sliced deep into her palm. She let out a sharp, muted gasp, but she didn't cry out. It was the reaction of someone who had learned that crying only brought more pain. She turned her head to wipe a stray, sweat-soaked curl from her forehead, and in that agonizing fraction of a second, Nicholas saw her profile. He saw the familiar slope of her nose. He saw the striking, pale green eyes of his late wife. It was Mia. Nicholas Costello, a man who had stared down rival cartel hitmen without blinking, a man who had calmly eaten dinner while his enemies begged for mercy in the next room, felt his heart physically stop. He froze, rooted to the imported hardwood floor, his mind fractured, unable to reconcile the image of his bright, vibrant billionaire heiress daughter with the bruised, emaciated servant bleeding onto the floorboards. I'm sorry, Mrs. Dawson," Mia whispered, her voice a raspy, broken shadow of its former self. "I'll clean it. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't pay for the vase, you little leech," Evelyn hissed, raising the riding crop high into the air. "Maybe a lesson will remind you of your place in this house." The crop began its descent. It never made contact. Nicholas moved with a terrifying, predatory speed that defied his 55 years. Before Evelyn could register his presence, a massive, scarred hand clamped around her wrist in a vice grip. The snap of the leather crop was abruptly replaced by the sickening sound of bone grinding against bone. Evelyn shrieked, dropping the crop instantly as she twisted to face her attacker. "Who the hell do you—" The words died in her throat. The color completely drained from her heavily made-up face. "Nicholas. If you ever—" Nicholas whispered, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with a lethal suppressed rage. "Breathe in her direction again. I will cut you to pieces and feed you to the dogs." He shoved Evelyn backward with such force that she crashed into a nearby console table, sending a silver tray clattering to the floor. Nicholas dropped to his knees, ignoring the water and glass ruining his custom suit. "Mia," he choked out, reaching for her bleeding hand. "Mia, my God." "Bambina!" Mia flinched violently. She scrambled backward like a terrified animal, hitting the wall behind her. Her wide, traumatized eyes darted wildly. When she finally looked at his face, there was no relief, only profound, paralyzing horror. "No," she whimpered, pulling her knees to her chest. "No, please. Don't let him sell me again. Please, I'll work harder." Nicholas felt a physical pain in his chest, sharper than any bullet he had ever taken. "Sell you, Mia? It's me. It's Dad. I'm home. I'm taking you out of here." "You lied!" she suddenly screamed, her voice cracking with years of repressed agony. "Rick told me. He showed me the bank transfers. You traded my trust fund to him to pay off the Colombians. You gave me to him to be Bradley's property." Nicholas's blood turned to ice. Bradley, Rick's sociopathic, drug-addicted, 25-year-old son. The implications of what she was saying crashed over him like a tidal wave. Rick hadn't just stolen the money. He had orchestrated a complete psychological destruction of Nicholas's daughter, poisoning her mind to believe her own father had sold her into servitude. Heavy, hurried footsteps echoed down the grand staircase. "Evelyn, what the hell is all that racket?" Rick Dawson barked, rounding the corner, followed by 4 heavily armed security guards. Rick stopped dead in his tracks. He was dressed in a velvet smoking jacket, a cigar practically falling from his slack jaw. For a span of 10 seconds, absolute silence gripped the room. Then Rick forced a hollow, arrogant chuckle, though the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed him. "Nicholas, you're out. Your sentence wasn't up until 2028. Nicholas slowly rose to his feet. He didn't look at the guards. He kept his eyes locked on the man he had once called a brother. "You took my empire, Rick. That's business. But you put my daughter in a maid's uniform. You let your wife beat her." "Now, Dom, let's be reasonable," Rick said, recovering his bravado as his guards unholstered their weapons, pointing them at Nicholas. Things changed while you were away. The families needed stability. The Colombians needed a guarantee. Mia needed a strong hand. She's going to marry my Bradley next month. It unites the bloodlines. It's good for business. She's a Costello, Nicholas growled, taking a slow step forward. She doesn't marry a rat's offspring. She's a nobody. Rick spat, his true colors finally showing. You're a ghost, Nicholas. You have no power here. The capos answer to me. The judges answer to me. If you had stayed in your cell, I would have let you live. But now you're trespassing. He snapped his fingers at his men. Put him down. The 4 guards raised their suppressed pistols. Drop the guns! A sharp, commanding voice rang out from the kitchen doorway. Everyone turned. Standing there was a young man in his late 20s, dressed in the dark, tactical gear of the Dawson Estate security. But his weapon wasn't aimed at Nicholas. His Glock 19 was pressed directly against the temple of Rick's lead guard. This was Liam Gallagher. Liam had been hired by the Dawsons 2 years ago, a former ranger with a flawless record. But what Rick Dawson didn't know was that for the last 18 months, Liam was the only reason Mia Costello was still alive. When Mia had been locked in the dark, Liam had smuggled her bread and antibiotics. When Bradley had tried to force his way into the servants' quarters late at night, Liam had covertly redirected patrol routes to ensure he was always standing guard at her door, risking his own life to deter the boss's son. In the shadows of the estate's sprawling gardens, amidst the cruelty of her reality, a desperate, fierce romance had blossomed between the fallen heiress and the quiet guard. Liam had been secretly siphoning money from the estate's secondary accounts, securing fake passports. They were supposed to run away to Vancouver in 3 days. "Liam, what the hell are you doing?" Rick demanded, his face purpling with rage. "Shoot him. That's an order." "My contract was to protect the assets of this estate," Liam said coldly, his blue eyes flicking momentarily to Mia. The raw, unspoken love and desperation in that single glance told Nicholas everything he needed to know, and she is the only thing in this godforsaken house worth protecting. "You're dead, Gallagher!" Rick screamed. "Maybe," Liam replied, never wavering. He looked at Nicholas. "Mr. Costello, I've got 3 flashbangs on my belt and an armored sedan parked around back. But there are 15 more men on the perimeter. How do you want to play this?" Nicholas looked at the young guard, assessing his stance, his grip and the fierce protectiveness radiating from him toward Mia. He then looked at Rick Dawson, a cold, empty smile spreading across his scarred face. "You think I drove up here without making a few phone calls first, Rick?" Nicholas said softly. Right on cue, the deafening roar of a heavy-caliber sniper rifle shattered the glass of the sunroom's bay window. The lead guard next to Liam dropped to the floor, his weapon clattering uselessly against the marble. Nicholas adjusted his cuffs. "I want my daughter, and then I want my city back." The echo of the high-caliber sniper round was still ringing violently off the imported Italian marble walls when the reality of the situation finally shattered Rick Dawson's delusion of control. The lead guard lay entirely motionless on the floor. A dark, expanding pool of crimson stained the antique Persian rug, creeping toward the broken porcelain. The remaining 3 security men, seasoned killers in their own right, didn't hesitate. They instantly dropped their suppressed pistols. They were paid handsomely to protect a cartel money launderer, not to fight an invisible, highly trained shooter who could thread a needle through double-paned glass in the middle of a torrential downpour. Evelyn Dawson finally found her voice, letting out a piercing, hysterical scream. She clamped her hands over her ears, sinking to her knees amidst the ruined shards of the Milanese vase she had just used as an excuse to torture a teenager. Nicholas Costello didn't flinch. He didn't even cast a glance at the dead man bleeding out on the rug. His dark, predatory eyes remained fixed solely on Rick, radiating a glacial, terrifying calm that made the room temperature feel like it had plummeted. "You thought ADX Florence was a cage, Rick?" Nicholas asked, his gravelly voice slicing through the sudden, suffocating silence of the sunroom. "You thought throwing me in a concrete box in Colorado meant I was deaf-dumb and blind to my own city. I built the Costello Syndicate from the ground up on the bloody streets of the South Side. I bought the politicians you think you own. I established the offshore banking networks you think you control." Rick swallowed hard, taking a trembling step back. His velvet smoking jacket, once a symbol of his usurped power, suddenly looked ridiculous. He looked like a frightened child playing dress-up in a dead king's clothes. "This is madness, Dom. You come into my house and shoot my men. The local police chief, Arthur Pendleton, is on my payroll. I have him on speed dial. They'll have a dozen cruisers here in 5 minutes. "Chief Pendleton," Nicholas stated flatly, rolling up the cuffs of his ruined charcoal suit jacket, "was indicted exactly 45 minutes ago. Wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. Right now he's sitting in a windowless interrogation room at the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago, crying for his lawyer and singing like a canary about your operations." Rick's jaw went slack. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking sickly and grey. "What, no? That's impossible. Did you honestly believe the U.S. Attorney's Office reduced my sentence and opened the gates of a supermax just because I had good behavior?" Nicholas took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Rick to retreat until his back hit the cold, mahogany wall paneling. "Thomas Higgins, the federal prosecutor. You thought I paid off. He wasn't interested in putting away a retired aging mob boss, Rick. He was interested in the Vale Norte cartel. He was interested in the $200 million of Colombian cocaine money you've been sloppily laundering through my casinos while I was locked away. You got greedy." Mia, still huddled in terror against the far wall, looked up. Her breath hitched in her throat. The blinding terror in her pale green eyes was slowly being replaced by a fragile, desperate, and agonizing confusion. The father she had believed sold her to a monster was standing in front of her, tearing down the empire that had enslaved her. She looked up at the young guard standing fiercely over her. "Liam!" she whispered, her bloody hand trembling as she reached for him. Liam didn't holster his weapon. He kept his body positioned squarely between Mia and the Dawsons, his eyes scanning the room for any sudden movements. But he reached back with his left hand, gently and firmly wrapping his fingers around hers. "It's okay, Mia," Liam murmured, his hardened, tactical voice softening only for her. "I told you I'd get you out. I just didn't know your old man was going to beat me to the punch." Nicholas's gaze shifted from the terrified Rick Dawson to the young guard assessing him, and then finally down to his daughter. The sight of her in that degrading uniform, her hair chopped away and her spirit battered, threatened to break his iron composure. The ruthless Mafia Don evaporated, leaving behind only a broken, desperate father. He knelt slowly, ignoring the sharp porcelain glass crunching beneath his knees until he was exactly eye level with her. "Bambina," Nicholas said, his voice cracking with heavy emotion. "Listen to me and listen carefully. I never touched your trust fund. I would never do that. The $50 million at First National Bank of Chicago. It's still there. Untouched. Rick forged the bank statements he showed you. He forged my signature with a crooked notary. He wanted you broken, isolated and destroyed, so you would have no choice but to marry his sociopathic son, granting him legal control over your inheritance the second you turned 25. I would burn this entire world to ash before I ever let someone sell you." A heavy sob tore out of Mia's throat. The dam finally broke. 4 years of psychological torture, physical abuse, and the soul-crushing belief that she had been discarded by the only parent she had left all came rushing out. She lunged forward, throwing her thin arms around Nicholas's neck, burying her face into his shoulder. Nicholas held her tight, fiercely, wrapping his arms around her fragile frame. He closed his eyes as hot tears he hadn't shed in decades tracked down his scarred, weathered cheeks. He kissed the top of her head, over and over, rocking her back and forth. "I've got you. Dad is here. I swear to God it's over." Well, isn't this just a touching, pathetic little family reunion? The slurred, wildly arrogant drawl came from the arched doorway, leading to the grand foyer. Standing there, leaning heavily against the doorframe, was Bradley Dawson. He was 25, dangerously gaunt, with dark, sunken circles under his manic, bloodshot eyes, a glaring symptom of his heavy, unchecked reliance on the very product his father was smuggling into the city. In his right hand, he held a heavy nickel-plated .45 caliber 1911 pistol, and his hand was shaking wildly. "Bradley, put it down!" Rick screamed, sheer panic finally breaking through his voice. "He has a sniper trained on the house. Put the gun away." "I don't care about a damn sniper." Bradley yelled, his eyes darting erratically around the room, sweat pouring down his forehead. He raised the heavy pistol, aiming it directly at Liam's chest. "This piece of trash rent-a-cop has been sneaking around the servants' quarters. You think I didn't know, Liam? You think I didn't see the way she looks at you? She's mine. My dad paid for her. She's my property, and no one is taking her from me." With a crazed glint in his eye, Bradley cocked the hammer of the .45. Time seemed to slow to a crawl in the Lake Forest mansion. Before Bradley could apply the 3 pounds of pressure needed to pull the trigger, 2 things happened simultaneously. Liam Gallagher, relying on his ranger training, shoved Mia and Nicholas violently to the floor, throwing his own body over them as a human shield. At the exact same millisecond, Nicholas, from his position on the ground, drew the snub-nosed .38 special he kept holstered at his ankle. 2 shots rang out. Bradley's bullet went wild, shattering a crystal chandelier hanging above the kitchen island, sending a cascade of sparkling glass raining down onto the marble countertops. Nicholas's bullet, fired with the cold, practiced precision of a man who had survived the brutal street wars of the 1990s, caught Bradley square in his right bicep. The heavy .38 round shattered the bone. Bradley let out a high-pitched, agonizing shriek, the nickel-plated gun flying from his grip and clattering across the floor. He collapsed, clutching his profusely bleeding arm, writhing in pain. "My boy, oh God, my boy!" Evelyn screamed, crawling on her hands and knees toward her son. Rick stared in absolute horror, his hands raised in surrender. "You shot him. You shot my son." "I disarmed a rabid dog," Nicholas said, coldly, slowly getting to his feet and helping Liam pull Maya up. "Consider it a mercy, Rick. In the old days, I would have taken his head." The heavy, imposing silence of the room was suddenly broken by a new sound. It wasn't the local police sirens that Rick had been hoping for. It was the deep, rhythmic thumping of heavy tactical vehicles tearing up the long gravel driveway, accompanied by the blare of federal sirens. Red and blue lights began flashing through the rain-streaked windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the ruined sunroom. Rick ran to the window, peering out into the torrential rain. 3 black-armored Bearcats and half a dozen unmarked SUVs had breached the front gates. Men in heavy tactical gear, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI and DEA, were pouring out assault rifles raised, swarming the perimeter of the estate. "What is this?" Rick gasped, turning back to Nicholas, his eyes wide with a terror that finally matched what he had inflicted on Mia. "Nicholas, what did you do?" "I told you," Nicholas said, smoothing his tie. "I made a deal with Thomas Higgins. I gave the U.S. Attorney's Office the ledgers, the real ones, the ones detailing your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, your laundering shell corporations in Delaware, and the exact coordinates of the Vale Norte supply drops in Miami. The Costello family is going legitimate, Rick, and you are going to federal prison for the rest of your miserable life." "You're a rat." Rick spat spit, flying from his lips, trying to mask his despair with rage. "You broke the omerta. You broke the oath." "The oath was broken the second you laid a hand on my daughter," Nicholas growled, taking a step toward Rick. He grabbed his former underboss by the lapels of his velvet jacket, pulling him in close. "You didn't just steal from me. You tried to destroy the only pure thing I have left in this world. Prison is going to be hell for you, Rick. I've already sent word to the boys inside. They know exactly what you did to my girl." Rick Dawson began to sob. It was a pathetic, broken sound. The heavy front doors were kicked open with a resounding crash. A team of FBI SWAT agents flooded the foyer, their tactical lights sweeping the corridors. "FBI, nobody move. Show me your hands." Nicholas calmly placed his .38 Special on a nearby table and raised his hands, turning to face the tactical team. A tall man in a sharp trench coat walked in behind the SWAT team. It was U.S. Attorney Thomas Higgins. He took in the scene: the shattered vase, the bleeding guard on the floor, Bradley sobbing over his shattered arm, and Rick Dawson on his knees. Higgins looked at Nicholas. "A bit messy, Costello. Our deal was a clean handoff of the ledgers." "There was a complication," Nicholas replied evenly, his eyes locked on Higgins. "A personal matter. It's been resolved." Higgins looked over at Mia. He saw the maid's uniform, the hacked hair, the blood on her hands. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. He knew the files on the Costello syndicate intimately, but looking at the 18-year-old girl, he saw exactly why the ruthless mob boss had agreed to turn federal informant. "Agent Miller," Higgins said, turning to a DEA agent. "Arrest Richard and Evelyn Dawson, racketeering, money laundering, and—" He paused, looking at Mia, "human trafficking and unlawful imprisonment. Bag the son for attempted murder of a federal asset." As the agents moved in, slapping handcuffs on the screaming Dawsons, Nicholas turned his back on the wreckage of his former empire. He walked over to Mia and Liam. Liam was holding his side. Bradley's wild shot had grazed his tactical vest, cracking a rib, but he was standing tall, his arm firmly wrapped around Mia's waist. "You did good, kid," Nicholas said to Liam, extending his hand. Liam looked at the hand of the legendary, terrifying Nicholas Costello. He reached out and shook it firmly. "I love her, Mr. Costello. I was taking her to Vancouver on Friday." A ghost of a smile touched Nicholas's lips. "Vancouver is too cold. The Costello family has a villa in Tuscany. Untouchable. Safe. That's where we're going." Nicholas took off his expensive charcoal suit jacket and gently draped it over Mia's trembling shoulders, covering the degrading maid's uniform. It engulfed her, warm and smelling of his familiar cologne. "Come on, Bambina," Nicholas whispered, wrapping his arm around her on one side while Liam supported her on the other. "Let's go home." They walked out of the sprawling, cold mansion, past the federal agents cataloging evidence, past the weeping shell of Rick Dawson. They stepped out into the rain where Frankie was waiting by the running Lincoln Navigator. The storm over Chicago was finally beginning to break, leaving behind a cold, clean reality, and a family forged in fire finally whole again. If you felt your heart pounding during Nicholas's ruthless return to save his daughter, smash that like button. This story proves that a father's love and a syndicate boss's wrath knows no bounds. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more intense, real-life mafia dramas, shocking betrayals, and thrilling family secrets. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Rick Dawson? Share this video now.